It's a channel, not your source. It's a channel, not your source. Hello, everyone. My name is Persohn. You can contact me at pastor@mascot.church, which is my email address, or in the comments below if you like. Now, if you like this video, share, subscribe to the channel. YouTube might recommend it to somebody else, but you never know how things happen in the wonderful world of computing and the internet these days. Hey, I hope you're well. We're going to take a moment and have a look at a topic that is really, it's kind of at the core of our everyday life. What really happens? What's going on with the things that come our way? Are they blessings? Are they curses? Are they here to test us? Who knows? Now, here's the title of today's talk. It's a channel, not your source. Now, I've been in public ministry now for, it's more than 40 years in various capacities. And some of the principles I'm going to share with you today have been evident for all of my time in pastoring. And as I've gotten a little older, looking back, I get a chance to reflect a bit more on some of them. God is your source. Everything that comes to us, whether we're believers or not, comes from Him. The other day I was on the train and just heading into one of my clients and just adjusting my eyesight, looking outside and seeing what was out there, the beauty of nature. And then for a moment, I was just struck, overwhelmed with just the ability, the fact that I could see. Like, wow, I can see. I have eyesight. Amazing. You know, all those things come from God. God is our source. Now, your job we'll talk about these things maybe more tightly linked to our day-to-day activities. Your job is not your source. It's a channel that God has opened up for you. Maybe your income comes because you're part of some government program, maybe a welfare system or program or whatever. That is not your source. God is your source. That was a channel that has been opened up to you. And this is at the core of our Christian, even non-Christian experience. We need to acknowledge God and thank Him for those things, and then know how to work the channels that He opens. And it's really simple on the surface, but as all these things are, with everything, there's a lot more to the detail. Now, I want to begin by reading a passage that should apply to all of us. If you're an unbeliever and you've turned up here today and you're driven to this passage, this applies to you as much as anybody else. And I'll read it. It's from Romans chapter 1, verse 18 and following here. Romans 1, 18 and following to 23. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For His invisible attributes, namely His eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made. So they're without excuse. For although they knew God, they did not honor Him as God or give thanks to Him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and creeping things. Wow, that's Romans chapter 1, 18 to 23. Have a read. The whole chapter is quite amazing, 1, 2, and 3 for sure, but this little section applies to all people, doesn't it? Even though they knew God, they know there's someone out there. They did not honor Him as God or give thanks to Him. The Lord Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount said that said that it rains on the just and the unjust. I need to check that, but certainly there's a comment there. In other words, the blessings come for the just, for the unjust. Sometimes we wonder, how come these people are being blessed in some way and I'm not, and so on, and how come I'm being blessed and somebody else isn't? Well, there you go. Now, God opens channels for our benefit, to provide for us, to care for us, obviously, but for other purposes as well. When God was dealing with the world through the nation of Israel, particularly in the wilderness wanderings, He opened one channel after another to test them. Moses in Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 2 comments about this. And so Moses was the great prophet of Israel at the time. And he said, and you shall remember the whole way that the Lord your God has led you these 40 years in the wilderness, that He might humble you, testing you to know what was in your heart, whether you would keep His commandments or not. Now, the channels that come to us, I'm speaking probably more to Christians here today, but think about this, are not just to feed us and to care for us, but also to test us. Now, I've seen this many, many times, and that's why I mentioned been in ministry for over 40 years. I've seen this many times, and that is people will have an experience with God, and they'll work to get their lives right, and they'll spend time praying, they'll spend time reading the scriptures, they'll get involved in a local church, and they'll really take charge of things in their lives, and that's a good thing, and that's fantastic. But then what happens is God begins to bless them. Maybe they get a good job, or maybe they move to a better place where things are a little bit easier. Maybe these things get fixed. And all of a sudden, or not, or maybe over time, sometimes it's all of a sudden, they stop praying so much. They stop studying. They stop fellowshipping. Next thing you know, you don't see them maybe once a month, or maybe a little bit less frequently. They always say, oh, yes, well, I'm a believer. Everything's all fine. But in their heart, they're growing colder and colder and colder. The thing that we observe over time is that they were tested with blessing, and the blessing, the test, is something that they failed. Because really, ultimately, everything has to do with whether or not we acknowledge God as God, and we give thanks to him. And so the blessings were given to them, and then it dried up their souls. And you can read, if you look at the Old Testament wilderness wanderings, you will see that this is something that God did when he dealt with Israel frequently. They demanded meat from him in a very selfish manner, even though he had cared for them. And he said, I'm going to give you meat, but leanness to your souls. Yes. So sometimes physical blessings, those jobs, those things that come, are really a test. So how do I do this? What do I suggest to you today? A channel that is open to you should be viewed with thanksgiving. Lord, I thank you for this job. I thank you for this opportunity. But it must also be viewed as a test. This is something that's going to test what's really going on the inside of you. Listen to what God said to Israel. He said, that he might humble you, testing you to know what was in your heart, whether you would keep his commandments or not. Now, it does not mean that God had to test them with evil or wicked things. No, those are hard tests. But really, experience has shown that those things tend to often drive people to humility and to prayer and to reflection and to studying the scriptures. The much worse test, the much more difficult test to pass is the test of blessing. When God gives you something, what are you going to do with it? In many respects, you could look at Western civilization as being tested and having failed its test. I think this happens with empires in general. You really see the empire, the great Western Empire. Now, it's not called that today, but probably in 40 or 50 years, or 200-300 years after it's long gone, it will probably be called the Great Western Empire. I'm hoping that the phrase that I'm introducing to the internet sticks. But yes, you can see its decline. You can see that we've been so prosperous that we have taken these things for granted, and we, instead of thanking God, we shake our fists at him. We don't, hopefully, but people tend to do that, and then they complain. They'll have 1,000 things, and they'll complain that they haven't got 1,001 things. You know what I'm talking about. Isn't it interesting that the last of the 10 commandments is the commandment that says, do not covet, don't be caught in greed? It seems the one that we're pretty much always going to fall into. Now, when God opens a channel for you, what should you do with that channel? Well, you should maximize that channel. You should be a good steward of that channel. Now, I say you should, I should as well. And I've learned that over the years, and I've gotten much better at it as I've gotten older. I realize that God opens a channel. I have to throw myself at this with as much diligence as I can. Now, God might open multiple channels for you of blessing, and maybe they're channels of opportunity, and maybe they're channels of responsibility. It's just this whole notion of God as the source. These channels are not your source. They're things that come and go. The other thing about this is that God may open a channel, a job, an opportunity to bring in money and blessing for your family and provision for you, your family, etc., and then it may close. Well, what do you do with that? Well, if God is my source, I'm not looking to the channel. I'm looking to him, and I'm looking to him to open another channel or to do something else for me. And so I'm constantly humbling my heart and saying, Lord, I'm asking you to do this to keep this going on in my life. And if I pass the one channel, maybe I get the next one. Maybe I don't either, because God knows more about what kind of testing I need than I do, and you as well. So this is part of this whole element here, is God brings these things. So God brings a channel, and what do I need to do? I need to throw myself at it with all diligence. Now, you will notice when you might notice, or I'll get you to look at this next time you read the scriptures and see if you can find warnings about working too hard. Just see if you can find anything from Genesis to Revelation. You could probably start in, if you wanted to really focus, you could probably start in, bump my microphone, in Psalms, Proverbs, Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Songs of Solomon, the wisdom passages, and just see if you can find anything and let me know. I can tell you I haven't found any warnings about working too hard. I have found a whole bunch of warnings on against being lazy and against sleeping too much and so on. You'd be surprised what you can do when you throw yourself at developing a channel that God gives you. Now think about this whole channel thing. God opens an opportunity with a job opportunity, a client, and whatever. Is it going to last forever? Of course not. Only God lasts forever. And so you know it's going to come to an end sometime. Well, what do? You maximize it. You do the very best that you can. Sometimes these things are dead ends. Sometimes you have multiple channels in front of you. You don't know which one to investigate or to take. And this is where a daily prayer for wisdom is really important. A daily prayer. Lord, give me wisdom today. Help me to decide. Some of these things are very difficult to decide. But as you get older, you get better at it. This is also an important element of understanding God's blessings and God's channels. You need to be around people who have been around longer than you. Humble yourself and say, well, this guy's been at this thing, this lady's been at this for a long time and been reasonably successful. You also can learn from people who have not been successful by what they didn't do. Well, there you go. Now, if you want a little bit of help on how to deal with channels, you can open Bible Gateway, use an English Standard Version, another version, King James or whatever, use modern words like laziness or diligence. Some Bible translations wouldn't use the modern words. But a search for the word diligent in the English Standard Version gives you these references from the book of Proverbs. These all talk about, or in my understanding, they are good advice on how to deal with channels that God gives you so that you're responsible in them. Here we go, Proverbs 12:24. The hand of the diligent will rule, while the slothful, that's the lazy, will be put to forced labor. The hand of the diligent. So I've got a channel. I'm not going to be lazy about this thing. I'm going to throw myself at it. I often will, if I'm on a due-and-charge relationship with a client, I'll always be sure to do more hours for them than I bill, and do the hours honestly. And sometimes on an invoice, I'll say, 10 hours worked, 8 hours billed, right? And I say, I really didn't feel right about billing those last 2 hours. Interesting, isn't it? Well, am I giving the client something? No, I'm not necessarily giving the client something. I'm not necessarily taking it from myself. I'm being honest. I'm not sure that I was doing the right thing in that period of time. Sometimes I'm doing a bit of homework that might benefit another client or another client relationship. So, but I will definitely be diligent and pay attention to detail there. Proverbs 12:27, whoever is slothful will not roast his game, but the diligent will get precious wealth. So that's really interesting. Talks about the hunter and the diligent. And you can see it. Now, there are people who get wealth who aren't diligent at all. That's a great mystery. That's a channel open to them that is testing them. Be careful not to envy those people. Be careful not to say, well, he barely works at this. How come he's got all that money? Careful. Watch your attitude. You're competing against yourself here. Just keep your attitude right. Proverbs 13:4. The soul of the sluggard craves and gets nothing, while the soul of the diligent is richly supplied. Back to my previous comment, there are people who don't do very much and get a lot of blessing if blessing is money. That is the exception, not the rule. Truly. They're odd. That's not how the majority behaves. The majority of people are blessed based on their diligence, on their wisdom, and how they stay with things and how they do things properly. Okay, so yeah, you look and you see, that guy was born with a silver spoon in his mouth or whatever, or he just happened to get the right project and he's now a multi-billionaire. Don't envy him. Don't covet what he's got. He has to deal with God just like you. The difference here is that he's not the average person. And of course, oftentimes we're being told that this is the way that it goes. Just pull these few levers and do these couple of things. Next thing you know, money will be thumping in the door. You ever see that on YouTube? You might even get accidental advertisements at the beginning of my videos. I don't think you get them in the middle, but I don't monetize the channel. And where you get some guy, and usually he has a British accent, and usually he talks very well. It's like, ooh, he says, I did this property thing, blah, 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 blah. Now I'm making X number of $1,000 a week or whatever it is. And you get really enticed by that. Well, of course, a lot of that is baloney anyways, but even if it is the case, it's the exception, not the rule. The rule, the blessing, goes to the diligent, it goes to the committed, and it goes to those who know how to operate the channels that God gives them. Let's go on here. The soul of the sluggard craves and gets nothing, while the soul of the diligent is richly supplied. Okay? And you'll often see this with human laziness. That is the soul of the lazy. He craves, but doesn't get anything. He's much more concerned about trying to get things than he is about trying to work for it. And working for things is hard. You know, we had an old Dutch minister's name was Reverend Van de Woude. I'll always remember him. And of course, this only works in the English language that I know of. But he said, if you, and with this wonderful Dutch rich accent as well, said, if you open your hand and you look, you can see the letter W in the palm of your hand. And he said, God put that there because it means work. That was good. I've always remembered that. Of course, it only works in probably English or any other language where work starts with W, but it's like, yeah, it always, yeah, that's what your hands are there to do. And so let's go on to the next one. Proverbs 21:5. The plans of the diligent surely lead to abundance, but everyone who's hasty comes to poverty. I tell you what, the book of Proverbs, it's a good place to go to get daily advice, and you can see that. And you can look up the actual meaning of the word hasty, check some other translations there. And finally, probably one of my favorite books in the entire Bible is the book of Ecclesiastes. Every year when I get to where I read the scriptures, I get there probably in 7, 8 months or something like that, 9 months. I just read the Bible kind of cover to cover, get to Ecclesiastes, I think, here it comes again, here it comes again. And there's just a lot of marvelous stuff there. My favorite verse, the one I quote, someone says, have you got a verse to quote or whatever? I say, yes, a living dog is better than a dead lion. And it comes from Ecclesiastes, I think, chapter 4. Well, listen to Ecclesiastes 9:10. Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with your might, for there is no work or thought or knowledge or wisdom in Sheol. That's the grave to which you are going. And of course, this is written from the standpoint of somebody who was not in the best place with God. And to him, the writer was under the understanding that everything was futile no matter what you did anywhere. But that little bit of advice, whatever your hand finds to do, do it with your might. Do it with all your might. Do it with all your diligence. God opens a channel. Now to honor him, throw yourself at the channel. Do the best that you can with that channel. And then you can say, hey, look, there's the, oh, hit the mic again. There's the parable of the talents, which kind of works that way, but it has an eschatological element to it. Nevertheless, the notion is there that the king gives some talents or some value of money to his servants, goes away, and he comes back. What have you done with these things while I've been away? So again, it probably doesn't have a direct application, but certainly an indirect one to our time. What are to our lives? What are you doing with the things that you have? You'll be asked about that, and particularly about your time. How did you use your time? There's a little program that runs in the back of our minds, maybe not yours, but it runs in mine. What have I done with the last few minutes? Could I have been more productive? Could I have learned something better? Could I have pushed harder? Could I have accomplished something? Did I waste this time? Was I dishonoring God in this time? Was I spending too much time being entertained and not enough time improving or developing the channels that God had given me? Okay, so let me just wrap this up this morning by, let me see the passage. Deuteronomy 8:2. This is a good one to remember. God dealing with Israel. We've already read it, but listen carefully. And you shall remember the whole way that the Lord your God has led you these 40 years in the wilderness. So just imagine it's nearing the end of your life. You live, let's say, 80 years. You say, you shall remember the whole way that the Lord your God has led you these 80 years, that he would humble you, testing you to know what was in your heart. Now, God knows what's in your heart, but do you know what's in your heart? That's the purpose of the test, whether you would keep his commandments or not. Well, there you go, ladies and gentlemen. God is our source. He opens channels, he closes channels. He does it both to bless us and to test us. And once we understand this, it helps the journey to provision and the journey to joy and peace in our daily walk get a little bit easier to understand. My name is Al Persohn. Come back next week for some more.